Please state your name and date of birth.
My name is Jason Sugars, and I was born in 1967, November of 67. Born in what is the unofficial, I was born in Venice Hospital, which is St. Monica's in Santa Monica, as Venice didn't have a hospital when we were kids. And my mom brought me home from the hospital to, what street is that? I want to say it's Westminster and Speedway. And I lived there with my mommy, and just alone with her for a little while, and some other young woman in our building was unfortunately murdered, and my mom moved out of the building immediately, and I moved in with my grandfather over in the hood, kind of, and my mom moved to UCLA and went to school. Initially, we lived in the back of the family shop, so there was a place called Bill and Totsy's, and it was they called themselves Antiques and Curios, but it was a junk shop, and there were a few of those on Abbot Kinney at the time when it was still West Washington Boulevard. And my grandfather and I lived in a little loft in the back of that shop on the 1200 block of what is now Abbot Kinney Boulevard. I was very, very little. What I remember of it reminds me quite a bit of what Melrose used to be before retail hit there. So there were a few smatterings of smaller mom and pop retail shops that sold little things, clothing, or sometimes secondhand clothing, and there was a couple of junk shops, and it was not fancy at all. It was at the time had been an abandoned retail area that people were trying to keep alive, and between that and what was called the Old Mall in Santa Monica was where you could go and buy things if you were just a regular person. On West Washington Boulevard, I believe it was primarily people lived there still. There were a few smaller, cheap restaurants, and there were a couple of old folks' homes, and that was that. A little later on, there's a hand-built American supercar called the Vector. I'd have to look, you could look it up. And they built those in a little warehousing on West Washington, right by where Ecole School is right now, across the street from it. So I would go down there. I wasn't allowed to walk too far from the place because I was very little. I was allowed to go down there and just sit and watch them build the cars, and they would show me all the speakers they were putting in and everything, and that it was quite and cool. Another block further down was a little house that had been converted into a jazz club called the As Is. And because the gentleman that opened that jazz club, and that was on West Washington Boulevard, 2 blocks down from us, because that guy was a friend of my grandfather's, who was Hippie Charles. The guy's name was Billy Harris. Because he was a friend of my grandfather's, and because he was an elder black cat, so my grandfather trusted him, and because he lived in that house that was a club with his kids, I spent a lot of time down the street with them when I was little. I didn't know them very well after once we moved away from there. But that was another thing that was unique to living right there, as well as a bunch of the kids that I grew up with in the Oakwood area when I moved over there on the 5th and Broadway. They were all into sports. They were all, it's a black and brown neighborhood, so everybody's into football and baseball, and I was not into any. I was into reading and listening to music, and I was an only child. So I spent all of my time, my playground or my Oakwood Park was the train tracks that used to run along Electric Avenue between West Washington Boulevard and Electric, where all of the parking lots are now behind Intelligentsia and all of those things, all of those lofts that are back there. That was all train track of the old Red Line that used to run down there, and that was my playground. I'd go out there and throw rocks or build stuff out of dirt or whatever I was gonna do. And I think those are like kind of unique with growing up on West Washington, because not many, I don't think any other kids lived there except me and Billy Harris's kids. When we moved out of the shop from West Washington Boulevard, we moved into one of the low-income apartment buildings over in the Oakwood district. There were, I think, 12 or 14 of them scattered throughout. We lived in one that was on the corner of 5th Avenue and Broadway, which not quite at that time yet, but over the years became one of the more notorious cross sections in Venice, where like you just couldn't go. Like I would have my friends from over here, this side, because I was interested in different things. So I'd get up, I would watch Soul Train with everybody else in my house, and then instead of going out to the neighborhood and trying to sneak beers or whatever with the rest of my friends, I would come over to the beach, where I met a bunch of people that ended up being some of my closest friends, and just kind of getting a range of more of the cultures that were in this small community. A lot of people that I grew up with over in Ghost Town, they only saw the white kids at school or at the park for sports. They didn't come on the weekends to United Skates over when we're to play video games all day with them. They didn't go to people's houses and hang out with their dad and their dog right on Market Street. They stayed in that area. So when you interview some of the people from Ghost Town, they won't be able to tell you a lot about what else was going on outside of Venice, except at school. And I was different in that I was just so into everything. Like when all of these guys over here on the other side of Electric or on the other side of Main started getting into punk, there weren't a gang of black kids over there that were into punk music, but everybody on this side, that was kind of a thing. And I just dove into it. I think that me and my cousin Marky, a couple others, are some of the very few from that side that really traverse both sides all the time. No matter how different we all ended up or even were as kids, there are certain things and rules and code that are unique to Venice and are in our DNA, just the way that those of us that were true to our neighborhood and to our friends and our family of Venice were, and it crossed the color lines. Like we could be somewhere where there might be somebody from the neighborhood you didn't even know, but you knew they were from the neighborhood. And if something popped off, it was Venice versus everybody. And some of us, although we're not that kind of person anymore, that feeling is still there. I believe that at some point, someone somewhere looked around and realized that there were a bunch of people that didn't have money, and notably a bunch of black and brown people that didn't have money, that owned property within a mile of the beach. And someone figured that just can't go on. That doesn't make any sense. We can't have that. This money, this is worth, what are they doing here? I mean, we all know historically what they were doing here. We were all brought here without regards really to our color or anything, and allowed to buy property as we dug out the swamps to build the community. Since that was only, the 1900s is, we want to call it, certainly not much more than like 40, 50 years after slavery when you think about it. So when Abbot Kinney bought this entire area of swamp with his business group and realized that his dream of just building stilts and making Venice, Italy here wasn't real. You can't build things on a swamp. I don't care what it is. You can't make moats. You have to dig that swamp out, dredge the entire swamp. It has to be filled with sand or whatever you got, which we had plenty of sand. And there weren't a lot of machines or companies that did that at the time. There were just people that did it, and there were certain groups or classes of people that were more suitable for hiring for that kind of work at the time. So there were a lot of black and brown folks brought here to do the hard work of physically building Venice. It's an analogy for the black folks that built this country that have yet to see anything out of it. And Abbot Kinney, in what I would believe is probably 40% altruism and 60% good, solid business sense, was like, let me sell these folks some property close to where I need them to work. They won't be big lots, but they can't buy anything anywhere else, especially not by the water, and they'll work for me and help me run this thing. And it'll be cool. I don't mind them that much. They're just, what are they gonna do to me? And I believe that because of that, black folks have been here in this area. It's unique. It may be the only coastal community of color. And certainly on this coast, it's the oldest colored community by the coast, period. I mean, you're gonna get a lot of people talking about the change and what is called gentrification, and what I have always kind of like mixed those two words of like gentrification, like genocide meets invasion, is kind of where I like mix those together. And I believe that the change that we see that's made a lot of us unhappy doesn't have as much to do with the cleaning up of Venice, quote unquote cleaning up. It's that when people say we cleaned up Venice, aren't you happy? What they mean is they cleaned away everything that we knew of it, including most of our people that we grew up with. That to them, cleaning Venice up to make it more palatable or suitable for a new generation of people that can better afford to be here or have more whatever classist right to this kind of environment, has been problematic in that new people have always come here because it's a unique and really cool place. We had beat poets. We had hippies playing drums on the beach for a living. We had jazz clubs. We had, this place has always been kind of a cultural hub of eclectic outsider art, from fine art to whatever. What I think is part of the change and it kind of fits in with the last idea of what people should know about Venice if they don't, or a lot of people may not realize that like when people come from above, as if we are the peasants and they are bestowing upon us culture and art and ideas and ideals. That's not the case at all. It was already here. The same coolness that brought all of these new folks to Venice used to work. Dennis Hopper moved here. He loved it. He was like, bro, who sells weed? Come hang out at my house. Let's do it. He came in, became a part of the community. What we've had in the past 2 decades, maybe 3 now, is more people that didn't come in with a hug, but came in to build a tall fence. Came in like, I'm here now. What the fuck are you doing here? You didn't make Venice cool or dope or hot or hip or any of that shit. You came here because it was already that. And it's like water displacement. So if you have a big giant thing of strong wine, a bucket, a trough of fine wine, and people slowly but surely start pouring driplets of milk in it because they want to come and bring their homogenized bullshit here and be part of that cool, it's water displacement. The things that brought you here, you've gotten rid of. The things that made it cool, you've gotten rid of. The people that made it what it is that are still alive or around, you not only have not included, but you've purposely excluded and looked down upon and spat and shat upon. And that is the end of my rant.